I like this interview here with Adam Booth. He was talking about Liam Williams' preparation for this Chris Eubank Jr. fight, how he hooked up with Liam Williams. But he also talks more broadly about tactics in boxing and how to get your tactics right and the right kind of mindset that you want a fighter to have going into a fight. He talks about the fact that he isn't trying to change Liam Williams, particularly given the fact that he's had such a short amount of time with him. He's not trying to change him. He's just trying to drill into him the things that he needs to do to obviously win the Chris Eubank Jr. fight. And when the interviewer asked him, what are those things? He said that you don't want a fighter to focus too much on their opponent's weaknesses. You instead want to get them to focus on negating the opponent's strengths and then working to implement their own strengths. Now, this is a very important thing in boxing because whenever I talk to beginners, people who have never boxed before and they're going to have their first spar or their first amateur bout, and they're nervous naturally, I tell them, concentrate on not getting hit first. Once you're not getting hit or minimizing the amount you're getting hit or you're not getting hit clean, then you can start building an offense off that, okay? Now, same kind of principle to what Adam Booth is talking about, because if you go in there thinking my opponent can't take body shots, for example, I'm going to hit him with a left hook in the body, I'm going to knock him out. Well, you might go in there looking for the left hook to the body to knock him out with a body shot. Meanwhile, he's countering you with a right hand every time you try and set up the body shot. Or he's got a really good jab. You see, you're not negating his strengths first, you're looking for his weaknesses first. And that's the wrong approach in most cases. You have to negate the strengths. Once the strengths are negated, then you can start looking for his weaknesses. And actually, when you negate the opponent's strengths, the weaknesses are going to present themselves to you. So, for example, Deontay Wilder, what are his strengths? The big right hand. Long, rangy, awkward, big right hand. So, the first thing you want to do in order to beat Deontay Wilder is take the right hand away from him. Once you've taken the right hand away from him, as Tyson Fury expertly did in their rematch in the second fight, then the rest was relatively straightforward for a guy of Tyson Fury's size and ability. Once he took the right hand away, Wilder really didn't have much else to offer. Now, with someone like Vladimir Klitschko, he has more than just a right hand. He's got very good right hand, good left hook, great jab, and good balance and whatever for a man of his size. But everything he does is off that jab. And if you take the jab away, Klitschko is much less effective with all the other tools he has. Not to say that he's ineffective completely, because ask Kubrat Pulev about Vladimir Klitschko's lead left hook. But certainly when Tyson Fury fought Vladimir Klitschko, he took the jab away because he's the taller, rangier man, and he used his height and reach to good effect, used his movement, took the jab away, and Klitschko really couldn't set anything up. Klitschko's never been a guy who's a good body puncher. He's never been a guy who excels at pressure fighting. He will apply pressure on the front foot behind his jab, right? Hitting you with a jab. But if he's getting out jabbed, he's not a guy who has the know-how to be able to get around somebody's jab, break you down, etc. That's not Vladimir Klitschko. That never was him. So that's an example of where Tyson Fury took away Klitschko's strengths, which are the jab, and also Klitschko being the taller, rangier man against most opponents. Tyson Fury took all that away by using his extra height and reach to his advantage. And once Klitschko was nullified, Tyson Fury just stuck to the jab for the most part. He didn't really add that much else to it. There was the occasional right hand or left hook, but it was pretty much just beating Vladimir Klitschko with movement and a jab by taking away his strengths, by tackling what his strengths are first, by focusing on what his strengths are, and what Klitschko's strengths are, and also focusing on what Tyson Fury's own strengths are, which at the time were movement, elusiveness, slickness, fluidity, and so on. So, yeah, I liked what Adam Booth said there with regards to you don't want, because the interviewer asked him about Chris Eubank Jr. and whether it's an advantage for Liam Williams being with a trainer who used to train Eubank Jr. And I did get the impression that the interviewer was trying to get Adam Booth to maybe say something disparaging about Eubank Jr., but he didn't. He was actually very complimentary for the whole interview about Eubank Jr. But yeah, he said basically it can be an advantage having trained a guy who Liam Williams is about to fight, But at the same time, it isn't necessarily, because again, you don't want to get your fighter to focus on the opponent's weaknesses too much, right? You want to focus on the opponent's strengths, how to negate them, and then how to impose your strengths, as in Liam Williams' strengths, on Eubank Jr. And Eubank Jr.'s weaknesses will present themselves once Liam Williams is imposing his strengths on Eubank Jr. and avoiding Eubank Jr.'s strengths. Okay, sounds a bit convoluted at this point, but hopefully you follow. Also, he said that with Eubank Jr., he's improved or evolved a lot since he trained him. And Adam Booth, by the way, has been in the gym with Eubank Jr. countless times. Long before he trained him, he had Eubank Jr. in the gym for sparring when he was still training George Groves. So he was very familiar with Eubank Jr. And, he said he's a very headstrong fighter who has the right mentality to be very successful in boxing. But sometimes a fighter can be so stubborn and unwilling to listen that it isn't conducive to success. If they have weaknesses in certain areas, if they're lacking technically like Eubank Jr. has been for many years in certain areas, then you really need to listen. Okay, if you're a guy who has sublime technique, maybe you learned boxing when you were very young and now you're in your 20s, your technique is absolutely sublime, you might be able to get away with not being particularly receptive to advice from trainers and what have you. But with Eubank Jr., he never had sublime technique. So you really need to listen. But anyway, I recommend you guys watch this interview because Adam Booth is, a trainer who I've always rated in terms of his understanding of boxing psychology. As you guys know, that's something I've always been very interested in. Human psychology in general, I've always been fascinated by it, but particularly boxing psychology. Many of the great trainers are like amateur psychologists, seriously. Customado was basically like an amateur psychologist. He read a lot of books about psychology and knew psychologists and obviously learned a lot about psychology from life experience and also through studying the fighters that he was working with and training and fighters who he admired and whatever. Customado learned a tremendous amount about human psychology. And boxing actually can teach you a lot about human psychology. For those who have eyes to see and ears to hear, you can learn an awful lot about the human mind through studying the sport of boxing because it's such an extreme sport. The kind of stresses that you're under in boxing are, I could say, far greater, but certainly different to the kind of stresses you're under if you're playing tennis or golf or some non-contact sport. If you're in a combat sport like boxing or MMA, the stresses you're under are a completely different level, okay? Because your physical health, your well-being, and even your life is on the line every time you step in the ring. And losing a boxing match, I'm sure losing a tennis match is not nice. Losing a tennis match is not the same kind of feeling as getting knocked spark out in front of 80,000 fans at Wembley, like Carl Frost did to George Groves. Not the same kind of feeling. Getting knocked spark out for most people is going to be a lot more humiliating than losing a tennis match. So again, the psychology in boxing is a very interesting thing to study, and Adam Booth has always been good with that. So I recommend this interview. Let me know what you guys think of it in the comments below, and let me know what you think of the Liam Williams, Chris Eubank Jr. fight. Do you think it's a good move going to Adam Booth? A lot of people think it's kind of a strange move because Williams isn't the type of fighter that Adam Booth would typically train. Adam Booth typically likes guys who are very athletically gifted, good movers, explosive shots from the outside. Liam Williams is more of a come forward pressure fighter. With that being said, earlier on in Liam Williams' career, he did try and box a little bit more, stick a jab. And I think that Liam Williams' jab could actually be a key in this fight. Because although Eubank Jr. is taller, and I think he does have longer arms, I don't think his arms are particularly long. So if Williams times his jabs in the right way, and he tightens up that defense a little bit, I think that could be a key punch in this matchup, is Liam Williams' jab if he can apply it in the right way. So we'll see whether Adam Booth is able to do that with him. If I was on Team Williams, that's certainly what I'd be advising, is hit this guy with a jab. Because anyone who's been able to successfully and consistently hit Eubank Jr. with a jab has had success against him. So rather than focusing on all your big power punches, Just like I said earlier on, focus on not getting hit with all those combinations first and foremost, and sticking a jab on this guy. Stick a jab on him, get him to start getting wild, then you can start unloading some of your heavy artillery. But just take the strengths he has away from him and impose your strengths, and Liam Williams does have a good jab. So let's see whether he can do it, and let's see whether even if he does impose the jab, it'll be enough to win the fight. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below.